Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to say goodbye to Riverdale. Really quickly, if you're not familiar with Riverdale, it is a show based around Archie characters. Basically, it takes place in the small town of Riverdale, which is kind of like this quiet, normal town. Obviously, for the design of the show, it kind of plays into like the comic aesthetic, but the show has a very it's set modern day because there's a lot of modern day technology with like cell phones and stuff like that, but it has a very 50s/60s aesthetic. Like it's like a town stuck in time in certain capacities, but that's like an aesthetic choice. It isn't like that in other capacities, but like I said, I think that's just paying more homage to the Archie comics in that capacity. But the quiet town gets turned upside down when Jason Blossom, who is the son of the Blossom family, which is like the most prominent family in town. In fact, the family is kind of the reason why Riverdale has the blossoming economy that it does. They're kind of like at the centerfold of that. Well, Jason is murdered, and it ends up becoming this murder mystery of figuring out, well, who murdered Jason and why. And so that ends up being the inciting incident in Riverdale, and the show kind of expands from there. Like each season is its own encapsulated thing. Most things are typically resolved, but obviously by the end of the season you're set up the next thing that the show has to deal with. But usually these story arcs are confined to basically a seasonal situation, but obviously there is bleed over in so many regards from season to season. So it's not like just like, oh, when it's dealt with in this season it's never brought up again. It's like, no, there's still the aftermaths bleed over into other seasons and stuff like that. So I mean, from the very beginning, I feel like the show probably still keeps a little bit of this as the show went on, but definitely the first season, I'd even say maybe seasons 2 and 3, definitely gave me Twin Peaks vibe. I think a lot of people, especially with the first season, kind of got Twin Peaks vibes because it's kind of got that dark town full of kind of quirky characters and weirdos. Like it definitely has that dark, quirky vibe that you would expect from Twin Peaks. And like I said, I feel like it still maintains some of that, but I feel like they kind of pull away from that a little bit more as the show went on. But, you know, I think it's still there at the heart of it, because the show isn't just a murder mystery. I'm not going to mince words. Jason isn't the first, death or murder that takes place in the show, but, and I think that ends up playing into a beautiful, tragic, but it's beautifully done, this tragic theme that there was a darkness in Riverdale that predated even Jason's murder. Even though that was the catalyst, so much ended up following after. You find out there's a lot more darkness associated with Riverdale than a lot of people were aware of. You know, there's so many, once again, that very Twin Peaks things of who do you trust, who's got secrets, who has the motive, you know, an opportunity to commit the murder. And, you know, it ends up being Archie and his pals who end up being at the heart of the investigation. It's mainly Archie, Veronica, Betty, and Jughead end up being at the heart of the investigation. I mean, obviously they're your 4 core characters, but then obviously as the show goes on, you get, you know, the expanded roster of all the other characters. You know, my experience with Archie is very limited. I'm vaguely aware of the Archie comics, but I wasn't really that well versed enough in the characters and some of their dynamics, which a lot of that, having done research and stuff, I've seen okay, so they've brought that aspect from the comics to Riverdale, because it's so interesting, because Riverdale, as the show is going on, has blended so much. They've taken a lot of stuff from the comics, which might have been one thing, and they transformed it into something else for the show. Like a character that might be a hero in the comics, or this kind of superhero thing in the comics, could end up being a villainous character in other capacities. I'll kind of leave it at that without really spoiling anything. But the show does a really good job of blending so many genres and stuff like that, especially later on in the show. I'll just say season 6 took a surprising genre shift that I was I wasn't expecting that to be season 6's genre. The show does have its darker elements to it, but it also does have that teen drama of it, because these characters are in high school for most of the show. But it is stuff that, yes, as high schoolers are figuring their lives out, and complicated relationships amongst them, and figuring themselves out, and figuring out who they are. There's elements to that, but there's stuff that's even outside of that, stuff that deals with the town and their relationships with their parents, because some of the characters have complicated parents, so kind of leave it at that and, you know, not get too deep into it. But it's still this really enjoyable ride, and like I said, not every season's a murder mystery, but when you now looking back in retrospect, there is a lot of like murder mystery elements. So there is like a very overarching mystery element, and just kind of like a lot of like the seasonal stories, but it's more so those are the overarching elements, and just the day-to-day aspect is like, okay, these are these developing character growth, you know, character development stories of just these, like I said, these characters just figuring them out, and the ebbs and flows and the struggles that they had to deal with over the course of the show. It's just a show I thoroughly enjoy. I talked about this in the series finale review, which I really loved. The series finale I thought was kind of beautiful, sad but beautiful. That I know this show has not been for everyone. Like I think you either like the show or you hate the show. I think there's a middle ground for people who are like, it was fine. And I know for some people it was a very guilty pleasure. I've never felt like the show was a guilty pleasure. I never be embarrassed to admit, like, oh yeah, I thoroughly enjoy this show. I've loved it since the beginning, and I've enjoyed this journey. It's still wild to me to think like, oh man, the show's done after 7 seasons. It just feels kind of surreal and crazy for it to be over, but I've enjoyed every step of the way. I mean, I never made a video for it at the time, and I might as well kind of lump it in here because it is Archie related. Obviously, this also connects with Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which is based on Sabrina the Teenage Witch from the Archie comics, but it's more specifically based off of a specific comic run called The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which is more like horror based. It's not as it's the same equivalency of like how you have these Archie characters in this very Twin Peak aesthetic in Riverdale. I should also note, like, where Twin Peaks kind of steps on that supernatural stuff, Riverdale doesn't for the most part, and I'll kind of leave it at that. It's like, what do I mean? You watch the show, you'll find out. Whereas like I said, like, imagine the Sabrina the Teenage Witch TV show, and it's like Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is kind of nothing like that. Like, it has the characters, but it's like, no, the storylines in a much more sinister, darker lane. And kind of very, like I said, very much like Archie is to the comics. I'm not sure the same thing's applicable for Sabrina and the like traditional Archie comics versus Chilling Adventures. But like I said, that's based on a very specific comic run of Sabrina called Chilling Adventures. So I just figured I should also include that as well, because there's some overlap. We'll kind of leave it at that in later parts of the show. And like I said, I was never able to make a video about that. That's a great show. I might as well make a video about that in the future. So it might still get its own video. But since I'm talking about Riverdale and Archie related stuff, I figured I might as well kind of include that as well. There was a spin-off called Kate Keene, which I can't really talk about because I never really watched it. I don't think I saw previews of it. Sadly, it was canceled after 1 season, but I never really watched it, so I can't really comment on it. But I figured I might as well include that information there too, in case you want to get the full like Archie experience of just kind of like, okay, here's one thing, because Riverdale, like, Kate Keene is a direct spin-off from Riverdale. But like Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, it's kind of basically its own thing in continuity. But like I said, those lines are kind of blurred, especially later on in the show, making it go like, no, they take place in the same universe. It's a whole thing. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good